Due Process, winner of 25 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2014 New York Emmys for our coverage of criminal justice and current affairs. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
He is hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted.
The old reefer madness image is laughable now.
Play faster. Faster.
And pot as criminal may be starting to seem passé.
For the first time, we here are legal in the state of Colorado.
Colorado was the first state to legalize, Washington the second. But are the other 48 likely to follow? Polls show attitudes changing across the country, with growing numbers saying yes to legal marijuana. A social reform whose time has come, or a misguided move.
I'm freaking out. What is this?
Rethinking recreational marijuana up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding from the New Jersey State Bar Foundation.
It's not that pot hasn't always had its proponents, but it's never come this close to mainstream acceptance. Some polls now show that nearly 60% of Americans favor legalization. So Colorado and Washington may not be the anomalies they may have seemed 2 years ago. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and we're not just talking medical marijuana, but straight-out recreational weed, and the kind of full decriminalization that could realize the high hopes of those 400,000 45 years ago at the world's most famous concert.
Coming into Los Angeles, bringing in a couple of keys.
It's no longer a hippie thing. Marijuana! Or confined to the young. Or even to those who smoke it. Now the calls to legalize marijuana are coming from such establishment sources as the New York Times editorial board and CNN.
Marijuana is considered a drug of high abuse, the highest abuse. Dependence rates are around 9%, as compared to alcohol, which is closer to 15%, heroin 23, 25%, cocaine 20%.
They're saying that marijuana got a bad rap early on.
What do you want?
Bring me some reefers.
That led to scientifically flawed beliefs about pot.
He is hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted.
And its legal designation as a Schedule I drug, like heroin.
I regard alcohol as being a much more dangerous drug than marijuana ever could be.
It wasn't until the 60s, when the youth culture actively embraced marijuana, that there even was much pushback.
Don't touch my bags, if you please, Mr. Customs Man.
But even as weed was finding mainstream acceptance, and not only among the young, the enforcement of harsh marijuana laws was being stepped up as part of the massive war on drugs.
March 1973, Richard Nixon authorized the formation of a new law enforcement super agency to fight drugs, the Drug Enforcement Administration.
In the words of the New York Times editorial board, it's been more than 40 years since Congress passed the current ban on marijuana, inflicting great harm on society just to prohibit a substance far less dangerous than alcohol. The federal government declared the Times unequivocally should repeal the ban on marijuana and leave decisions on how to handle it to the states. States like Washington and Colorado, where recreational pot is now legal and regulated much like alcohol, or states where it's been largely decriminalized or allowed for medicinal use, or put to the public in referendum.
Look at that cloud of freedom. You'll tell your grandchildren you were here.
And if the legalization trend continues, if the federal ban's reversed and the states do follow Colorado's lead, our grandchildren may actually be shocked to learn that pot was ever treated as a serious, dangerous drug for which millions of Americans, disproportionately Black Americans, were locked up.
But what about this softening attitude toward the use of marijuana? A good idea or a dangerous mistake? For some very different answers, we turn to Udi Ofer, Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey, Jon-Henry J.H. Barr, President of the state's Municipal Prosecutors Association, and Kevin Sabet, Director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida and a former advisor to the White House Office of Drug Control Policy. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kevin, I think the proper way to start is with you. If we have a sea change in popular perspective about this, including polls that show non-marijuana users have changed their attitudes, what do you attribute it to? Is it false consciousness or people being misled in some way?
Well, I think we need to update the video and update our perspective a little bit. First of all, since Colorado was legalized, you actually now have both candidates running for governor that are actually running away from legalization. In fact, Governor Hickenlooper said that he thought the policy had turned out to be reckless. We have 17% plummeting decline in support for legalization in Colorado, that according to a poll that just came out. Nationwide, actually, the most recent Public Policy Institute of Religion poll showed actually a reduction.
But let me crystallize it.
Sure.
So you don't accept that there is a shift in...
Of course there's been a change
so
in the
what
last
we're
10
trying
years.
to get...
The point is, in the last year, since legalization has had its tryout, okay? Right. Legalization looks different in theory than it does in practice.
I'm trying to cabin you. I know it's hard to do. I know that you disagree with the policy and you think that those who go down this road will regret it. But there is a broader sea change, which we'd like your insight into.
No doubt there's been a sea change over the last 10 or 15 years. Now, that's not in conformity with the medical literature. In fact, every major medical association, again, what wasn't listed, what was listed on the video was the New York Times, but the American Medical Association and every major medical association in the country has come out against legalization, saying it's a public health concern. And I think there's just been a huge disconnect between the public's perception of marijuana as a harmful or harmless drug and the scientific literature. Now, you're asking why. I think one of the reasons why is that today's weed is not your Woodstock weed. Okay, this is much stronger than it was 30 years ago, and a lot of people are basing their perspective on the Woodstock days of the 60s.
Kevin, let's get back to that, but let me ask you, Udi, since in fact popular opinion clearly is still on the side of legalization, and yet we have a president who is not willing to make the move to take it off of Schedule 1, where it sits with heroin and as more dangerous than methamphetamine. I mean, that's something that's sometimes hard to ponder, whether you're pro-marijuana or you're anti. Where are we going with this if, in fact, you've got a reluctance, a foot dragging on the part of politicians, perhaps, even though the public may say yes?
Sure. Well, what we're seeing is that the status quo has been disastrous, while at the same time there are clear, smarter, and better alternatives. By making marijuana legal for adults 21 or older, we will be creating a controlled system.
And nobody's calling for anything other than that.
Right, 21 or older, and that's very important, that will create a controlled system that will be able to restrict marijuana access and sales. It will free up law enforcement time to focus on violent crimes, and it will stop turning otherwise law-abiding adults into criminals. Here in New Jersey alone, we make more than 21,000 arrests a year for marijuana. That's more than 21,000 arrests a year for an activity that the last 22 years of U.S. presidents have admitted to engaging in.
And the difference between black arrests and white
arrests?
arrests?
Well, not all communities are treated alike. Black New Jerseyans are close to 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than white New Jerseyans, even though study after study shows that whites and blacks use marijuana at a comparable rate. And getting arrested for marijuana is significant. It could include up to 6 months in jail, more than $1,100 in fines, and collateral consequences with your immigration status, financial aid, housing status, child custody. All of this is costing New Jersey a ton of money. We spend more than $127 million a year in enforcement. Meanwhile, 111 Americans have said that they've used marijuana. The last Gallup poll showed that 58% of Americans support marijuana legalization. We need to take marijuana out of the street corners, out of our parks, and into licensed stores where we could tax and regulate and restrict access.
JH, let me bring us to another weather vane aspect of this, which is we were talking to Kevin about a sea change. Over the years, in my own practice, I've known that prosecutors sort of have a filter, and hierarchically, many of them view this as different from other drug violations. But now the Municipal Prosecutors Association has taken a position. What's its position, and why do you think it's happened now?
Earlier this year, the Municipal Prosecutors Association voted to pass a resolution supporting the legalization of marijuana subject to reasonable regulations. As Udi was stating, we don't support an anything goes type of system.
Senator Scutari has proposed legislation. He's one of your members.
That is correct.
And you've said we support it.
We support the concept. We do believe that the status quo simply isn't working. I am prosecuting more and more people for possession of marijuana who have no criminal background, no inclination to be criminals, and we're not getting anything positive out of our efforts to prosecute these people. Therefore, we support taking a different approach.
Was there a massive debate and large dissent, or did this reflect a consensus of the association?
There was not a great debate. I broached the issue at a meeting at the beginning of the year because I had just come off of a lengthy, hotly contested suppression hearing, motion hearing, in my municipal court, in one of my two municipal courts. And I realized after
the hearing where you try to get the judge to throw evidence out because there's a claim of a constitutional violation.
Correct. The police retrieved a marijuana joint without a warrant, and it led to an ongoing multi-day hearing. I had to bring police officers off the road where they could have been patrolling. I had to, schedule extra court sessions. I had to spend a lot of time and money. I had to write a brief, and at the end of the day, even though the judge agreed with me, it was one joint that this 22-year-old woman had in her car, and I thought to myself, this is nuts. So I brought it to the association, and the other prosecutors agreed with me.
So their analysis was resource-driven?
It was primarily resource-driven, but it's also fundamentally realizing, based on my experience, not just as a municipal prosecutor, but as an EMT. I've been an EMT for 12 years. It's simply not the danger that we've been told it is, and we're not getting the results we need to get.
Kevin, come on in.
Yeah, there are so many ways to change. I agree that with a lot of what was said in terms of the current status quo being unsustainable, and it's certainly that one experience you had, I think, is unconscionable. But the issue is we can make those changes in our laws in terms of removing criminal penalties. We can make sure that you don't get discriminated against for immigration or employment if you have a marijuana record. We can do all of those things without going to this extreme policy of essentially creating
decriminalization.
Well, a version of it, yeah. Instead of creating what we're creating in Colorado and Washington is the next big tobacco. We now have a massive corporate interest whose interest it is to increase addiction with these marijuana gummy bears, these cookies, these candies. They are no doubt marketing to kids. I'm glad you haven't seen any as an EMT kids going, but in Colorado, dozens of kids a month are going to the emergency room because of acute marijuana intoxication, because they're getting their hands on these marijuana candies that look like Hershey bars that say, well, they're supposed to be split among 15 people, and they're eating the whole thing like any of us would with a candy bar.
So how would your decriminalization work?
Remove criminal penalties for low-level amounts. Don't stick them into that kind of system. Make sure there are warnings and fines where you don't have to go to see a judge. Make sure you don't have you have sealed records or no records, so that when you apply for a job, you don't have to answer the question, were you arrested or do you have a criminal record? Yes. You can actually answer no. You're able to do these things in a way that still deters use, because you still want to have a societal imprimatur that this is illegal, but at the same time doesn't go overboard. And I admit we have gone overboard in many cases. Certainly your case, JH, illustrates that. Let's not go overboard. But the answer to that, and see, the reason, by the way, these polls, let me just say one more thing about these polls. These polls are not tapping into sentiment among people who really want to smoke dope. As you mentioned, most people don't smoke marijuana, yet they're saying they want to legalize. They are tapping into the sentiment that JH and his association are tapping into, which is, we don't like the current sustainable system. We want something else. The issue is that other thing
that all those polls show is that the vast majority of Americans believe that alcohol is more harmful than marijuana.
Big deal.
Well, big deal. We live in a country where alcohol is absolutely legal
because
for people over 21.
Because alcohol has had a history of 5,000 years of mainstream Western culture. I don't think anybody around this table or anyone in the state would say that alcohol legalization has been a positive public health policy. It's legal because of its cultural acceptance, not because of the fact that it's good for you. Or listen, prosecutors and cops spend 3 times as much of their time on alcohol-related offenses than on marijuana or all drugs combined. Alcohol is a disaster. It's just not legal because it's in our culture and we want to drink, and 60% of Americans do so. 7% of Americans smoke marijuana. Very different.
Lots of responses. First of all, on decriminalization, we've had close to 40 years of experiments with decriminalization. Let's talk about New York State. New York State decriminalized marijuana in 1977.
But
in 2011, New York City was the marijuana arrest capital of the world and made more than 50,000 arrests. So decriminalization
doesn't always mean
what happens with decriminalization, it depends on who's in power. And if you have a Mike Bloomberg and a Ray Kelly, you will continue arresting people for marijuana. If you have a David Dinkins, you will not. So decriminalization is not the solution. Secondly, it's not the solution because it doesn't disentangle the criminal justice system from the issue. JH should not have to spend any of his time dealing with minor marijuana possession. Whether you send someone to a drug court or to a municipal court, it is still entangling JH's time, the police resources, into an activity that the last 22 years of U.S. presidents have engaged in.
So you think Kevin's form of decriminalization would not take it out?
I think
there are many forms.
It's a softer, gentler approach to prohibition. It is better than the status quo, but it is not the solution that Americans are looking for. And by the way you reduce harmful use of drugs like alcohol and like tobacco is how we've done it. Look at teen use of tobacco. We are right now at historic lows of seniors in high school using marijuana, using cigarettes. More seniors smoke marijuana than smoke cigarettes. Meanwhile, why? Because one is regulated, there are public education programs around it to lower cigarette use to historic lows, whereas with marijuana, the only person who's educating you is the street-corner dealer.
Let me ask you this, and maybe Kevin and JH want to comment, Udi, but it seems to me that the level of discourse around marijuana, going from reefer madness to the current day, is not a focused debate about relative harm, relative good, and social harm, economic harm versus the pharmacological nature of the product. Do you think we would benefit from any kind of serious discourse about it, or do you think that's an illusion?
Absolutely, and I will credit Kevin. I think of most prohibitionists, he's more reasonable because he does call for a softer, gentler approach, which we agree with would be a step forward. But let me give you one statistic that I think is very informative, and that is the addiction rate. Tobacco, about 35% of people who smoke cigarettes become addicted. With alcohol, it's about 15%. With marijuana, it's 9%. So there's no question of adults. So there's no question there are harms, and I'm not minimizing those harms, particularly for adolescents, and we need to control that. But
how do you control it? Don't adolescents drink?
Yeah, they drink more than they smoke marijuana.
The law says that they can't drink.
That's right.
It doesn't stop them.
And it's because we have an industry that only makes money off of
But young people smoke marijuana now.
Yes, but
the problem is they do it now more than they smoke cigarettes.
We've changed guests in midstream. We now have the softer, gentler Kevin. So the question is, I mean, I've been in this debate for 40 years, and I don't recall a time. I mean, we could have had this debate when Reggie Walton was in the office that you later served in. We could have had this debate any time in the last 50 years. In a way that really looked at how we schedule drugs, how we deal with them, what harm of criminalization, and what other kinds of remedies there are to dealing with both the harm, all the harms. We haven't had it.
Well, you're making it political. We haven't had it because it took some time.
This is a body politics.
Right, but when you have a couple of billionaires who are the ones funding legalization in this country, well, hold on. You have 3 main billionaires who have funded it in Colorado and Washington. The issue is it's hard to have that discussion. I think we would all agree that the answer does not lie on a bumper sticker.
There's been a muddle in this discourse, and it hasn't been a monopoly of Democrats or
Well, that's
Republicans.
because the hippie has been replaced with the 85-year-old cancer patient in terms of what's the face of marijuana in this country.
So
I know Sandy has a question.
So that goes to my next question, which is that people on your side of this argument have said about medical marijuana all along. This is a wedge. This is a stalking horse. This is a way into legalization. I think that looks like perhaps that was true.
Yes, but the issue is there are medical properties of marijuana. That's not, we're not, well, I think there are, but the way that it's been presented, the laws that have been written oftentimes have been a wedge through. Sorry, you were going to
say. But hasn't that softened public opinion?
Yes, but from my perspective, it's just unconscionable that we're not exploring medical marijuana as a real viable potential medicine in society today.
Very restricted in New Jersey, we should say, although it is legal here, it's very restricted.
Let's do it like we do every
and
other
hasn't been
medicine.
fully implemented.
And
but let's forget, that's because the state shouldn't be in the business of approving medicine. What state legislator or voter is in any position to say whether some molecule is medical or not? Let's have it go through the scientific process. Let's increase the science. We would all agree there have been hurdles. Let's get rid of the hurdles.
But that's been a heavily politicized process.
But let's depoliticize it. Why do we have to legalize it?
We live in an environment where everything's
Congress
politicized.
can do it tomorrow.
Let me ask you a question, JH, which sounds technical, but I think really goes to the heart. Let's assume that Kevin becomes emperor tomorrow. So there are those who would not even want the gender softly Kevin there. But if you fully tried to decriminalize, there are lots of little nuances to this. So, for example, we have a diversionary program that's basically available, but you only get to use it one time.
Correct.
And so once you've used it, you're now in a different position in the criminal justice system. Would you envision that if the legislature was moving in that direction, they would thoroughly and completely take the criminal justice system out, or do you think at the margins there would still be some involvement in terms of what we might think is doable in the modern world?
I'm not sure how that would play out, but I do on this issue agree with Udi that the best approach would be a legalization with a regulatory environment, which would regulate some of the things that we talked about, making sure kids can't get candy. Right now, if you go step outside any high school in New Jersey, ask any kid coming out of high school, what's easier for you to get right now, a bottle of vodka or a marijuana joint? They will all tell you it's easier for me to get a marijuana joint.
They're not smoking marijuana more. They are drinking more. It doesn't matter what's easier. They are drinking more.
But they cannot get the access to the alcohol that they can with marijuana.
They're drinking more.
So Udi
they are getting
Kevin,
access.
you believe that we're in a point where the New Jersey legislature or the Congress could have a rational discourse, including not just the pharmacological issues, but a rational discussion of a regulated sales system?
Well, let me tell you what we are doing. Let me tell you what we're doing in New Jersey. Let me tell you what we're doing in New Jersey. We're working very closely with Senator Scutari to learn from what has worked in Washington or Colorado, to learn what has failed in Colorado. It's still too early with Washington, and to create the next generation of tax and regulate. We're going to do it through the legislative process, not through a ballot initiative, which means...
But we don't have the option here.
Well, you could do it through a constitutional amendment,
Except
which
through
we don't think it's great. But what that means is it won't be two questions on a piece of paper. It will be a very long piece of legislation that goes into the nitty-gritty detail on how we prevent marijuana from becoming another big tobacco, because we agree with that criticism and we don't want it here, but there are things that we could do.
So can
how
that
do we
go through the
restrict it to
legislature?
children?
Can that get through the legislature?
Well, that is what we're going to be working on.
And if it does, and if Chris Christie is still governor, what happens?
Well, he would probably veto any bill that would come before him right now. But there are Republicans who agree with legalizing marijuana, and
I think you've said you're a Republican.
I am, and I am one of them. I've come to this opinion. This is not something that this is not a view I've held forever. It's just over the past year that I've come to this position, and I've realized the status quo has failed so miserably that we need a new regulatory scheme that will enable people to be able, who want to consume marijuana, to do so in a restricted
environment. It's fine to have a new scheme, but we don't need to repeat the 80 years of deceit and lies from the tobacco industry, which is what we are on the brink of doing in this country, and what we are seeing in Colorado and Washington. The reason why support has plummeted in Colorado is because this looked great in theory, but in practice this has looked very different. By the way, the dealers are still there. They're just selling to kids, and they're undercutting the legal market. The joke in Colorado is no one goes to a marijuana store unless you're an AARP member or a tourist, because you're going to keep going.
I think it's a disservice to the public discourse to draw conclusions about the experience in Colorado based on, what, 9 months of evidence, 10 months of evidence? In Washington, we have a couple of months of evidence. Let's see what happens. Let's give it at least a year to see what happens.
Okay, we've got 30 seconds. We've got 6 or more states that are moving toward referenda on this issue. Is it going to pass there? And in 10 years, is marijuana legal everywhere? 15 seconds, yes or no?
Definitely not legal everywhere. 10 years.
We're going to see many, many more states tax and regulate marijuana, just like Washington and Colorado have done.
The lies and deceit go both ways. People now know the marijuana is not the dangerous drug it used to be, and it will be legalized in more states.
And the conversation
more
will go
dangerous now
on,
than it used
but
to be.
it won't go on here because we have run out of time. So, with our thanks to J.H. Barr, Kevin Sabet and Udi Ofer. That's it for this edition of Due Process. But you can watch any of our programs anytime on demand at dueprocesstv.rutgers.edu.
And we hope you'll join us next week and every week for more important issues of law and social justice. It's what makes us unique. And what just won us? The Community Change Award from the New Jersey Black Issues Convention. For Sandy and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So I got a special video for you today. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the very first time that I've shown a live growing marijuana plant on my channel. I've shown some freshly harvested buds and some freshly trimmed buds, but I don't think I've shown some full-grown live plants before. And I'm out here at the greenhouse at River Rock and walking amongst several hundred plants that are flowered and ready to be harvested and trimmed up. Over here, off in the distance, we've got several hundred more veg plants that will be flowering soon enough. So yeah, check it out. I got some good footage of some fresh live plants that are about ready to be harvested, about ready to be cut down. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy seeing the variety and the difference in the different plants. And I wish you guys could smell all the different smells, but yeah, hopefully you guys will be able to appreciate the difference in each different plant. And yeah, anyways, without further ado, hope you enjoy.